Jonas Reeve never expected his day to start like this. He was a simple diplomat from Earth, tasked with managing trade deals and fostering peaceful relations between humanity and various alien species. But as he stood in the Grand Galactic Council chamber, he quickly realized that today would be anything but ordinary. The chamber was vast and imposing, with sleek metallic walls that reflected the faces of the alien representatives seated on the council. The atmosphere was tense, and Jonas felt the weight of their gazes as he waited. The air was thick with anticipation, but Jonas had no idea why. Then the voice of the Galactic Council's leader, Archantharis, rang out, deep and commanding. "Human Representative Jonas Reeve, you have been summoned today to receive an inheritance of considerable importance." Jonas blinked in confusion. Inheritance? He wasn't aware of any inheritance. He had no family on other planets, at least none that he knew of. He shifted uncomfortably on his feet as the council members exchanged knowing glances. An inheritance, Archon. From whom? Jonas asked, his voice betraying his unease. The Archon's eyes glinted with amusement. From King Malkar of the Zinthari. You have been named as the inheritor of his daughter, Princess Talia. The room erupted in laughter. The sound was sharp and mocking, echoing off the high walls of the chamber. Jonas looked around, utterly lost. The council members were laughing as though they had just heard the most ridiculous joke. "Excuse me," Jonas stammered, trying to understand what was happening. "Do not be alarmed, Earthling," Archantharis continued, his voice calm despite the laughter. "King Malkar, in his infinite wisdom, has decided that you are the best possible candidate to inherit his daughter. She has become quite a handful." Jonas frowned. The situation felt absurd. But why me? I'm a diplomat, not a king. I don't even know the Zinthari. The laughter grew louder, as though Jonas had made a joke himself. "Odd, you see," the Archon said, holding up a hand to silence the council. "King Malkar believes that you, an outsider, someone from a distant planet, will be able to manage the troublesome princess. Her defiance has reached new heights. Her father hopes that you, as her new guardian, will be able to tame her." Jonas's heart sank. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Inherit a princess. The idea seemed ridiculous, but the laughter from the council had an edge of seriousness to it. This was no joke. King Malkar was, apparently, very serious. "And if I refuse?" Jonas asked, trying to hold on to some shred of dignity. "That," said the Archon, his tone turning grave, "would be considered an offense. Under galactic law, refusing an inheritance is tantamount to declaring war. You must accept." Jonas's mind raced. A refusal wasn't an option. But taking on a princess, a rebellious, unwanted princess at that, he was completely unprepared for this. "Where is she?" Jonas asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it aloud. "Right here," came the cool voice from the side. Jonas turned to see a woman stride into the chamber with an air of defiance. She was tall and imposing, with sharp, angular features that suggested strength. Her long, silver hair shimmered like a halo, and her eyes gleamed with an unsettling mix of curiosity and contempt. She wore the royal attire of the Zinthari, but it did little to soften her fierce demeanor. "This is Princess Talia," the Archon announced, as if the mere introduction would explain everything. Talia gave Jonas a pointed look, her lips curling into a slight smirk. "So, you're the one they've chosen to handle me?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Jonas met her gaze, unsure whether to laugh or feel insulted. "I suppose so," he replied cautiously, "but I'm not sure why they think I'm the right fit for whatever this is." Talia raised an eyebrow. "Trust me, you'll regret this. But I suppose you have no choice, do you?" The council members continued to watch the exchange, as though they were observing some grand performance. It was clear they found the situation highly amusing. Jonas, feeling overwhelmed, took a deep breath. He had no idea what he was getting into, But one thing was certain. This was going to be the most unusual diplomatic mission of his life, and something told him that the princess was only the beginning of the problems he was about to face. "Very well," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "I'll take care of this. But just so we're clear, I'm not here to tame anyone." Talea's smirk widened, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "We'll see about that," she muttered under her breath. The council, still chuckling, signaled the end of the meeting, leaving Jonas with more questions than answers. As he walked out of the chamber, the weight of his new responsibility settled on him. He had inherited more than just a princess. He had inherited a mess, and it was one he was about to be stuck with. Jonas Reeves sat in the quiet confines of his ship's briefing room, his mind still reeling from the events that had unfolded in the Galactic Council chamber. He had inherited a princess who, according to the council, had caused enough trouble to get her own father to give her away like an unwanted pet. As the ship's engines hummed softly, Jonas tried to focus on the task at hand. His mission had just taken a bizarre turn, but he had a duty. The princess, Talea, was his responsibility now, for better or worse. Talea sat across from him, her posture regal but her eyes sharp, observing him with the intensity of someone waiting for a mistake. Her arms were crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line, and her gaze never strayed from Jonas. Jonas cleared his throat, trying to break the silence. "Look, I don't know what you expect from me, but I'm not your jailer. I was assigned to handle diplomatic affairs, not babysit a princess." Talea scoffed, not bothering to hide her disdain. "Oh, you're so much more than a babysitter, human. You're my new guardian, as they so charmingly put it." Jonas sighed. "Right, guardian. So what exactly does that mean? Am I supposed to just keep you from causing any more trouble?" Talea's eyes glinted with something dark, but it was gone in an instant. She leaned forward, speaking in a low voice that carried an air of secrecy. "My father didn't just hand me over because I'm a troublemaker. I'm here because I found something important." Jonas raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something?" Talea glanced around as if to ensure no one was listening. "A conspiracy. There's someone in my royal court planning something catastrophic. If I'm right, it could lead to a war between the Scifi and the Galactic Council. A war that could shake the entire galaxy." Jonas stared at her, unsure if he should believe her. The princess didn't look like someone who would risk everything for such a noble cause. But then again, she didn't look like someone who would be sent away for no reason either. "Wait, so you're telling me your own people are plotting something that could start a war?" Jonas asked, his skepticism clear. "Exactly," Talea said, leaning back in her seat. "I uncovered the plan when I was snooping around the royal archives. But the moment I did, I became a target. That's why my father wanted me out of the picture. He's in on it. He's been too weak to stop them, so instead of protecting me, he sent me to the humans to keep me out of the way." Jonas's mind raced. He was still trying to wrap his head around everything. Talea, the rebellious princess, wasn't just causing trouble for no reason. She was running for her life. And worse, she had knowledge that could change everything. "So why tell me?" Jonas asked, his voice quieter now. "I'm just a diplomat. What can I do?" Talea looked at him, her gaze more direct now, as if she was sizing him up. "Because you're human. You're not tied to my court, to the Scifi. You have the freedom to act without the political weight of our world holding you back. The council will never believe me, but they'll listen to you." Jonas shook his head. "But I'm no hero. I'm just trying to keep peace, not start a revolution." "Then why did you agree to this inheritance in the first place?" Talea shot back. "You could have walked away, but you didn't. You're in this now, whether you like it or not. You might as well help me." Jonas rubbed his temples, trying to process it all. He never wanted to get involved in royal politics or intergalactic conspiracies. His job was supposed to be simple, but now it seemed he had no choice. Fine, Jonas finally said, his voice firm. I'll help you, but only because I don't want to see a war start. But I need more than just your word. I need proof, something concrete to take to the Galactic Council. Talea's eyes sparkled, as if she had been waiting for him to say exactly that. I have it. I've been collecting evidence, pieces of their plan, and it's all stored in a secure location on Zinthar. If we can get there and get the information, we can expose them. And I can finally put an end to this. Jonas stared at her for a moment, wondering what he had gotten himself into. A princess, a conspiracy, and a war. This was far beyond anything he had prepared for. But there was one thing that was clear. Talea might be difficult to handle, but she wasn't lying. And if what she said was true, the galaxy was about to face a crisis. He stood up, resolute. All right, we're doing this. We'll go to Zinthar. But we'll need a plan, and we'll need to be ready for anything. Talea stood as well, her smirk returning. I've got plenty of ideas. Don't worry, human. I'll make sure you don't regret this. Jonas wasn't so sure about that, but one thing was certain. This was no longer just a diplomatic mission. It was a race against time to stop a war, and the princess was his only ally. The stars outside the ship's viewport streaked by, glowing like tiny jewels scattered across the void. Jonas Reeves sat in the command chair, his hands gripping the armrests as he tried to focus on the mission ahead. His head still buzzed with the weight of the situation. He wasn't just carrying a princess to her home planet. He was walking into a conspiracy that could tear the galaxy apart. Beside him, Talea stared out the window with her usual look of calm defiance, her fingers lightly tapping the surface of the table. She had explained the basics of the plan to Jonas, but there was so much more she was keeping to herself. He could sense it in the way she avoided making eye contact whenever the subject of her royal family came up. The ship hummed with the soft sound of the engines, and Jonas tried to ignore the feeling of unease that settled in his chest. It had been days since they left the council chamber, and now they were heading straight for Zinthar, the very heart of the Zinthari Empire. It was a dangerous place for someone like him, especially with Talea, the princess who had been cast aside like a broken toy, at his side. You're awfully quiet, Talea finally said, her voice breaking the silence. Jonas glanced at her, his eyes narrowing. I'm thinking. This mission, everything, just feels off. Of course it does, Talea replied with a smirk. What did you expect? This isn't exactly a sightseeing trip. I didn't expect a royal conspiracy, Jonas muttered, glancing at the star chart on the control panel. Zinthar was still hours away, and they didn't have time to waste. Why would your father want to hide something so important? He could have just told the council. Talea's expression darkened. Because my father isn't a hero. He's weak. He always has been. The conspiracy is bigger than just him. It's in the royal court. Powerful families want to take control of the throne, and they'll do anything to get it. Jonas felt a chill run down his spine. So, your father's part of it. Talea's eyes flickered, her face tight with frustration. He's not part of the plot. He just doesn't have the strength to stop it. When I discovered the plan, he knew it was over. I became a threat. That's why he sent me away. Jonas stayed silent for a moment, absorbing her words. He couldn't imagine being caught in the middle of such a betrayal. To have your own family turn against you, he couldn't fathom it. But Talea didn't seem weak. If anything, she had the fire and determination of someone who wasn't going to back down, no matter the odds. What's the next step when we get to Zinthar? He asked, breaking the silence. Find the data, she replied without hesitation. The archives are heavily protected, but I know where the files are kept. The information we need is locked behind layers of security, but I've already been inside before. We'll break in and retrieve everything we need. Jonas raised an eyebrow. You've been inside the royal archives. Talea's smirk returned. You didn't think I was just some helpless princess, did you? Jonas chuckled, despite himself. I guess not. So we're breaking into a royal archive, stealing classified information, and hoping we don't get caught by your entire royal guard. Talea's smile widened. Exactly. Jonas let out a breath, glancing back at the stars. The mission was madness, but there was no turning back now. He had come this far, and he couldn't just leave her to face whatever danger awaited them alone. Despite her arrogance, there was something about Talea that he couldn't quite ignore. She wasn't the spoiled princess the council had made her out to be. She was a survivor. "We'll need a plan," Jonas said, focusing his attention on her. "We can't just go in blindly. The royal guards are probably all over the archives. I've seen the way Zinthari soldiers operate. They won't be easy to fool." Talea nodded, her eyes sharpening with interest. "I've already thought of that. We'll use their own security against them. If we time it right, we can slip past unnoticed." Jonas rubbed his chin. "And if we don't?" "Then we fight," Talea said flatly, as if the idea didn't faze her at all. Jonas stared at her, impressed by her confidence. She was serious about this. There was no hesitation in her voice. He wasn't sure if it was bravery or madness, but either way, he wasn't about to back out now. As the ship glided closer to Zinthar, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. He had no idea what awaited them on the planet's surface, but one thing was certain. The princess was more dangerous than he'd ever imagined, and if they were going to pull this off, he'd need every ounce of his diplomatic skills, and maybe even a little bit of luck. He glanced at Talea one last time before focusing on the task at hand. "We'll need to be smart. We can't afford to make any mistakes." She gave him a sharp nod, her eyes gleaming. "Don't worry, Jonas. I'll make sure you don't regret this." Jonas wasn't so sure about that, but he had already committed. Now, all he could do was brace for whatever was coming next. The ship entered Zinthar's atmosphere with a loud hum, the planet's surface rising quickly beneath them. The thick clouds above the cityscape of Zinthar's capital flickered with light from the planet's massive energy fields. Jonas glanced at the control panel, ensuring their landing trajectory was perfect. He could feel the tension building inside him. Talea, sitting across from him, had already gotten into her gear. She wore a dark cloak that covered most of her body, the hood pulled up to conceal her face. There was no sign of the princess Jonas had first met. This was a different Talea, focused, determined, ready for whatever was coming. "Ready?" Jonas asked, his voice steady despite the nervous energy thrumming in his chest. "Born ready," Talea replied with a slight grin. "Just follow my lead." As the ship touched down in a secluded part of the capital, Jonas couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. Zinthar was a dangerous place. The city was a maze of towering structures, shadowed alleys, and military checkpoints. Talea's family had ruled this place for generations, but to Jonas it was a fortress, and they were about to break into the heart of it. They disembarked from the ship, cloaked in shadows as they blended into the busy streets. Zinthar's capital was alive with the buzz of alien life forms. Creatures of every size, shape, and color moved about, none paying them any special attention. It was a normal day in the capital, at least to the casual observer, but for Jonas and Talea, this was anything but normal. They were about to walk into a lion's den. Talea led the way through the streets with swift, deliberate steps, her eyes scanning every corner. Jonas kept close behind, his senses on high alert. They were headed for the royal archives, located deep within the city's central district. The place was heavily guarded, but Talea had a plan. "You've got the codes, right?" Jonas asked in a low voice. Talea nodded. "I've already hacked into the royal system. We'll be able to get past the guards and access the data. Just stay out of sight and follow my lead." As they reached the base of the towering archives, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The place was too quiet, too still. He glanced around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The towering structure loomed over them, casting a long shadow across the street. It was an imposing sight, one that made him feel small and vulnerable. "Here we go," Talia whispered. She pressed her palm to a hidden scanner by the door, and it clicked open with a soft hiss. The door slid open, revealing a long hallway lit only by faint ambient lights. The air inside was cold, sterile. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as they crept forward. Jonas glanced at Talia, who was moving like a shadow, her steps silent and purposeful. He could see the tension in her face, but there was no turning back now. They were in. They moved quickly through the building, following the map Talia had memorized. It wasn't long before they reached a secured vault at the heart of the archives, its entrance guarded by a security panel and a series of biometric locks. Talia approached the vault with ease, tapping a few commands into her wrist device. "I've bypassed the biometric locks," she said, her voice steady. "Now we just need to get inside." Jonas kept watch, his hand resting on the handle of the weapon at his side. The tension in the air was thick. He could hear footsteps down the hall. A guard patrol was getting closer. He quickly motioned to Talia, his heart pounding in his chest. "Faster," he muttered, barely able to contain his panic. With a final click, the vault door slid open, and they slipped inside just as the guards turned the corner. Jonas held his breath, his eyes darting to the shadows, praying they hadn't been seen. They were safe, for now. Talia wasted no time. She walked to a terminal in the center of the room, connecting her wrist device to the archive's main system. "The data's encrypted, but I can handle it," she said, her fingers moving rapidly across the interface. Jonas kept his eyes on the door, ready to fight if necessary. He wasn't a soldier, but he was a survivor, and if they got caught, he'd make sure they went down fighting. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, Talia let out a sigh of relief. "Got it. All the files are downloaded. We have everything we need." Jonas nodded, but the relief was short-lived. He could hear voices echoing down the hall, growing louder. The guards were getting closer, and they couldn't afford to be caught. Talia closed the device and looked at him, her eyes full of urgency. Time to go. Now. They moved quickly, retracing their steps to the exit. The sounds of footsteps grew louder, but they managed to stay ahead of the guards. As they neared the door, Jonas glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the guards on their tail. Just as they reached the exit, a loud alarm blared through the building. Red lights flashed, and the sound of running footsteps echoed through the corridors. They were no longer invisible. "Run," Talia shouted, and they both sprinted into the streets of Zinthar, the data in hand and a galaxy of danger chasing after them. The streets of Zinthar's capital erupted in chaos as the alarm blared louder, warning of an intruder breach. Red lights flashed over every building, and guards poured out of every corner, searching for the two intruders who had slipped past their defenses. Jonas and Talia ran, their footsteps pounding against the hard pavement. The data was secure in Talia's device, but that didn't matter now. Their only goal was survival. "We've got to make it to the ship," Jonas shouted over the noise, trying to catch his breath. "I know," Talia called back, her pace unbroken. She darted into an alleyway, pulling Jonas with her. They twisted through narrow paths, moving faster than most Zinthari soldiers could follow. She knew the city like the back of her hand, weaving through shadows and corners with ease. Jonas, though, was struggling to keep up. He wasn't used to this level of danger, but there was no time to slow down now. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed behind them as a group of guards rounded the corner. They had been spotted. "Split up," Talia yelled. "We'll lose them faster that way." Before Jonas could protest, Talia darted in the opposite direction, disappearing into the maze of alleyways. Jonas hesitated for a split second, but he knew it was the only way. They couldn't afford to be caught together. He took off in the direction she pointed, hoping she knew what she was doing. The guards weren't far behind. Jonas could hear their footsteps echoing, the sounds of armored boots clanging on the ground growing louder with every passing second. His heart raced in his chest as his mind raced through escape plans, but none seemed to work. He was running on instinct now. Around him, the city was alive, yet in the middle of all the chaos, he felt like a ghost. He had no idea where he was, but there was no time to worry about that. He just had to keep running. Jonas turned a corner and found himself on a wider street, surrounded by busy Scifi citizens. He was in a crowded market district, where vendors sold all sorts of strange items, some of them glowing, others shifting in shape. The marketplace was a stark contrast to the danger he was running from. "Keep moving," Jonas muttered to himself. He wasn't stopping until he reached the ship. He pushed past a few vendors, narrowly avoiding a collision with a tall, scaly alien. He didn't dare look behind him. Every second was critical. Suddenly, he heard the distinctive sound of a blaster charging. He ducked just in time as a bolt of energy shot past him, narrowly missing his shoulder. One of the guards had spotted him. "Not good," Jonas muttered. His breath came in ragged gasps as he bolted to the side, narrowly avoiding another shot. He didn't have the luxury of slowing down to fight back. If he did, he'd be cornered, and that was a risk he couldn't afford. He kept moving, weaving in and out of the crowd, hoping the bustling marketplace would provide enough cover. The guards were close, but they couldn't move as freely through the crowd as Jonas could. Then, a sharp turn down a side street gave him the break he needed. He shot down the alley, his mind focused solely on reaching the ship. His legs burned from the exertion, but he couldn't stop. Not now. He had almost reached the end of the alley when a voice shouted behind him. "Stop. You can't run forever." Jonas glanced over his shoulder. Two guards, their weapons drawn, were now blocking the alley entrance. There was no way around them. His hand went instinctively to the small blaster at his waist. He wasn't trained to fight like this, but he had no choice. If he didn't defend himself, the guards would take him down. He reached for the blaster, but before he could react, a loud crash echoed down the alley. A blur of movement shot past him, and suddenly, the two guards were thrown to the side as Talia appeared, her cloak billowing behind her like a shadow. "Not bad, Reeve," she said, panting as she offered him a quick grin. "Did you miss me?" "Talia." Jonas exhaled in relief. "I thought you'd." "I'm not so easily caught," she interrupted. "Now, come on. We don't have time to stand around." Without waiting for him to reply, she grabbed his arm and yanked him down another side path, leading them both toward the escape route she had prepared. They had no time to waste. The guards were getting closer. Together, they sprinted through the twisting streets, weaving between buildings, dodging patrolling soldiers, and taking every shortcut they could find. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they'd reached the docking bay where the ship waited. Jonas could see the ship's silhouette in the distance, but as they approached, a roar of engines cut through the air. Another ship, much larger and more intimidating, was hovering nearby. It was a Scifi military transport. "We're not going to make it," Jonas said, panic rising in his chest. "Yes, we are," Talia replied, her voice sharp with determination. She tugged him forward, her hand gripping his firmly as they made a final dash toward the ship. The military transport was closing in fast, but Talia's ship was already powered up, the engines humming with life. The moment they reached the ship's ramp, it lifted off the ground, barely avoiding the incoming fire from the transport ship. "Hold on tight," Talia shouted over the noise as the ship shot upward, leaving the planet behind. Jonas glanced at her, and for the first time, he saw a hint of a smile. "You were right. We did it." Talia's eyes twinkled with amusement. "You didn't think I'd let you down, did you?" The escape from Scifi was far from over, but for now, they were safe. At least until the next challenge came, and Jonas had a feeling it was going to be a big one.